When you picture a powerful ruler, who do you see? Asterisk a king, an emperor, a general. History, we are told, is the story of great men. Asterisk, but what if the history you know is only half the story? What if I told you that some of the most cunning strategists, ruthless warriors, and brilliant builders in human history were women? Asterisk, they aren't just forgotten. They were erased, their names chiseled of stone. Their stories are given to their sons. Their legacies are buried under centuries of dust and bias. Asterisk, we all know about Cleopatra. We know Elizabeth I. Their stories are the exceptions. But today, we are going on a journey to find the ghosts. The queens who ruled empires, commanded armies, and defined ages, only to be dismissed as myths or footnotes. So relax as we hear the stories of Asterix histories. Forgotten Queens Asterisk, we will uncover the story of the woman who ruled as a king, and how her successor tried to wipe her from existence. Asterisk. We'll find the nomadic warrior who defeated the founder of the Persian Empire, one of the most powerful men who ever lived, and delivered a gruesome personal justice. Asterisk, and we'll meet the African queen who held back European colonial powers for 40 years using masterful diplomacy and brutal warfare. Asterisks, these aren't just women's stories. This is history, and it's time to set the record straight. Let's start off with the king who was a woman. Asterisk. Our first story begins in the most powerful empire of the ancient world, Egypt, 18th dynasty, around 1479 BC. Asterisk, the pharaoh, Thutmose II, dies. His heir, Thutmose III, is a small child. As was custom, the boy's stepmother and aunt, Queen Hatshepsut, steps in to rule as his regent. Asterisk, and this is where the story should end. A temporary placeholder. She was supposed to keep the throne warm, and then, when the boy came of age, fade into the background. But Hatshepsut had other plans. Asterisk, she didn't just rule for the king. She became the king. Within a few years, she had claimed the full titles and power of Pharaoh. She wasn't Queen Hatshepsut, she was King Hatshepsut. She wore the kilt, she wore the false beard. She rewrote the rules of power itself. Asterisk, but this wasn't a military coup. It was a masterpiece of political propaganda. She claimed the god Amun-Ra himself had declared her ruler. She pointed to her royal blood. She was the daughter and wife of a pharaoh. She argued she was more royal, more divine, than her little stepson. Asterisk, and her reign wasn't one of war. It was one of peace, prosperity, and building. She launched one of the most famous trade expeditions in Egyptian history, a journey to the fabled land of Punt. She brought back gold, ivory, and, for the first time, live incense trees. She built hundreds of structures, but her masterpiece was this. Asterisk. Her sublime of sublimes, a temple so modern in its design, it looks like it was built thousands of years after her death. For 22 years, Egypt flourished under her command. She was one of its greatest builders, one of its most successful pharaohs. Asterisk, so why have so few people heard of her? Because after her death, someone tried to erase her. Completely. Decades later, her stepson, Thutmose III, finally came to power, and a systematic campaign of erasure began. Her name was scrubbed from king lists. Her statues were smashed and buried in a pit. Her cartouches on temple walls were chiseled out and replaced with her father's, her husband's, or her stepson's. For centuries, it worked. History forgot her. She was a missing link, a ghost in the 18th dynasty. When historians first began deciphering hieroglyphs, they were baffled. They saw a king who, was sometimes referred to as her. They thought it was a grammatical error. Asterisk, it wasn't until the 20th century, when archaeologists at Deir el-Bahari began piecing together the hundreds of thousands of smashed statue fragments, like the world's most difficult jigsaw puzzle, that her story finally re-emerged. Asterisk, the big question is why? Was it simple revenge? A jealous stepson finally getting his payback? Asterisk, some historians think it was more complicated. Thutmose III became a great military pharaoh, the Napoleon of Egypt. Perhaps he couldn't have his legacy, the legacy of a warrior king, legitimized if his predecessor was a peaceful woman. Maybe to secure his own line, he had to restore Mata, divine order, and pretend the interruption of a female king had never happened. Asterisk, he didn't destroy her temple, he just edited it. He tried to write her out of the story, but he failed. She was too good a builder. She built too much, and she built too well. The woman who became king refused to stay buried. Asterisk, have you ever heard about the warrior who humbled an empire? If not, let's asterisk travel forward in time and halfway across the world. The 6th century BC. The vast, wind-swept grasslands of Central Asia. This is the home of the Scythians. Asterisk, the Scythians were a nomadic people, feared warriors, masters of the horse and the composite bow. They lived and died in the saddle, and they were ruled by a warrior queen. Her name was Tomyris. Asterisk, now, our main source for this story is the ancient Greek historian Herodotus, so we have to separate fact from legend. But the legend itself tells us what the ancient world thought of this woman. Her story is a direct confrontation with one of the most famous great men in all of history, Cyrus the Great, founder of the Persian Empire. He was, by all accounts, an unstoppable force. He had conquered the Medes, the Lydians, the Babylonians. He ruled the largest empire the world had ever seen, and now he turned his sights north to the lands of the Scythians. Asterisk, Cyrus's first move was diplomatic. He sent a proposal of marriage to Queen Tomyris. Asterisk, Tomyris saw right through it. She knew he wasn't after a wife. He was after her kingdom. She sent back a warning. "Rule your own people," she said, "and let me rule mine. You will not cross my borders unpunished." Asterisk, Cyrus, of course, ignored her. He built a bridge across the river Araxes and marched his undefeatable army into her lands. But Tomyris was a Scythian. She wasn't going to fight a pitched battle against his massive force. She did what nomads do best. Asterisk, she retreated. She lured him deeper and deeper into the barren steppes, stretching his supply lines, harassing his flanks. Cyrus was getting desperate. He needed a decisive victory. So, he set a trap. Asterisk, in this is where the story gets personal. Asterisk, Cyrus left a small, weak contingent of his army behind in a camp, along with a massive supply of strong, undiluted wine. The Scythians, who were used to drinking their wine cut with water or drinking fermented mare's milk, not accustomed to this. Asterisk, Tomyris's son Spargapises led the attack. They overwhelmed the Persian detachment and found the wine. They drank themselves into a stupor. Asterisk, Cyrus returned with his main force and slaughtered the drunken Scythians. He took Tomyris's son prisoner. Asterisk, when Spargapises sobered up and realized what had happened, the humiliation, the failure, he begged Cyrus to be unbound. Cyrus agreed. And the moment his hands were free, the prince took his own life. Asterisk, when Tomyris learned of her son's death and the treacherous way it happened, her grief turned to rage. She sent Cyrus a message. and it is one of the most chilling messages in all of history. Asterisk, I swear by the sun, the Lord of the Scythians, you bloodthirsty man, you have murdered my son by deceit. Now I will give you your fill of blood. Asterisk, she gathered every warrior she had. This was no longer a game of strategy. This was a battle of annihilation. Asterisk, Herodotus calls it the fiercest battle he had ever heard of. The two armies clashed, and for hours, neither side would give way. But in the end, the Scythians' fury, and their intimate knowledge of the land, won the day. The Persian army was shattered, and Cyrus the Great was killed. Asterisk, but Tamiris wasn't done. Her vow was not yet complete. Asterisk, 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 asterisk. However, Tamiris was far from done. Her vow was not merely a half-hearted commitment. Asterisk, she had her soldiers find his body. She had him decapitated. And, according to the legend, she took his head, plunged it into the skin of blood, and said, ... asterisk, I warned you I would give you your fill of blood. Now, drink. Asterisk, this powerful story was indeed retold for numerous centuries. However, take a look at how it was conveniently framed as a barbarian and a savage. It appears that she was driven largely by emotion and rage, but don't forget that she was an incredibly brilliant defender of her beloved homeland. She managed to out-strategize and ultimately defeat a man who was widely recognized as the Great. Sadly, she was not erased by chisels or any other physical means, but rather, she was painted in a much more negative light, being depicted as a monstrous creature. A mere footnote in the much-cited great man's story. Asterisk. Now let's remember the 40-year war of a resilient queen. Asterisk. We move now to 17th century Central Africa, to the kingdoms of Ndongo and Matamba. The world is changing. European powers are arriving, and they are here for one thing: slaves. Asterisk. The Portuguese are tearing the region apart, forging alliances, breaking treaties, and capturing thousands. The kingdom of Ndongo is on the brink of collapse, and in 1622, they send a diplomat to Luanda to negotiate peace with the Portuguese governor. This diplomat is Nenga Mandi. Asterisk, and her very first meeting with the governor sets the stage for her entire life. It is a masterclass in power. Asterisk. Nzinga enters the audience chamber. The Portuguese governor, Correia de Sousa, is sitting on a velvet throne on a raised platform. The only other seat in the room is a simple mat on the floor. Asterisk. This was a deliberate insult, a power play, to make her kneel, to show her she was inferior. Nzinga doesn't even blink. She looks at the governor, then looks at one of her servants. She gives a simple signal. Asterisk. The servant becomes a human chair. Nzinga sits on her back, bringing herself to the exact same eye level as the Portuguese governor. Asterisk. She then proceeded to negotiate as an equal, not as a vassal. She dominated the talks, speaking fluent Portuguese, and secured a temporary peace. When she left the room, the governor, stunned, told his aides he had never met anyone like her. Asterisk. By the way, if you are finding these stories as incredible as I do, and you believe history is full of people like Nzinga who deserve to be known, please take a moment to subscribe. We are dedicated to finding these stories. Asterisk. When her brother died, Nzinga seized the throne, and for the next 40 years, she waged a relentless war against the Portuguese Empire. Asterisk. She was a political and military chameleon. When it suited her, she converted to Catholicism, took a Portuguese name, and used diplomacy. When that failed, she took to the field. Asterisk. She led her armies herself. Well into her 60s, she was a master of guerrilla warfare. She built a new kingdom in Matamba, a safe zone for escaped slaves and those fleeing the Portuguese. She even forged an alliance with Portugal's mortal enemy, the Dutch, to fight their common foe. Think about this. She was a 17th century African woman. She had no vast industrial complex. She was facing one of the most powerful maritime empires in the world, an empire with guns and cannons, and she never surrendered. She fought them to a standstill. She died in 1663, at the age of 80. Undefeated, she died in her own bed, as the ruler of a sovereign, independent kingdom. So why is she forgotten? Because colonial history doesn't like complex villains. It's easier to tell a simple story of European conquest. Nzinga complicates that narrative. She wasn't just a victim. She was a brilliant, ruthless, and resilient opponent who used every tool at her disposal: diplomacy, war, religion, and espionage to protect her people. She was a true queen in every sense of the word. Hatshepsut. Tamiris Nzinga, a builder who was chiseled from stone, a warrior who was painted as a monster, a strategist who was dismissed by colonial historians. And let us not forget the Empress, who broke Rome, sweeping drone shots of a desert. Then, the stunning ruins of Palmyra, Syria. This is Palmyra, the pearl of the desert. In the 3rd century AD, it was one of the richest cities in the world. It sat on the most important trade route on Earth, a buffer state caught between the two great superpowers, the Roman Empire to the west and the Persian Empire to the east. Palmyra was ruled by a client king of Rome, Odia. He was a brilliant general, and Rome let him be. But in 267 AD, he was assassinated. Power passed to his regent, his second wife, a woman who claimed descent from Cleopatra. Her name was Zenobia, and Zenobia was not interested in being Rome's client. She looked west, and she saw an empire in flames. Rome was in the midst of the crisis of the 3rd century. It was splintering. Emperors were being assassinated every few months. She looked east, and she saw the Persians, who she had held at bay. And she saw her chance. This wasn't a regency. It was a coup. First, she used her armies to secure the Roman East. In 270 AD, she invaded and conquered Egypt, the breadbasket of the Roman Empire. Then, she pushed north, taking Anatolia, modern-day Turkey. In just a few years, she had forged her own empire, the Palmyrene Empire. She controlled Rome's wealthiest provinces, its grain supply, and its trade routes to the east. This was her declaration of independence. She minted coins with her son's face on one side, and her face on the other. She called herself Augusta Maris. She had done the impossible. She had broken the Roman Empire in two. She was, by all accounts, brilliant. She spoke multiple languages, patronized philosophy, and ruled over a tolerant, cosmopolitan court. But she made one fatal miscalculation. She assumed Rome would stay broken. In 270 AD, a new emperor came to power. A hardened, brutal soldier emperor named Aurelian. And once he'd secured the West, he turned his full, undivided attention to Zenobia. What followed was a blitzkrieg. Aurelian's legions smashed Zenobia's armies at Amay. They beat her again at Amaza. He was relentless. He marched across the desert and laid siege to Palmyra itself. Zenobia, seeing the end, fled the city on a camel, racing for Persia to seek an alliance. She was captured by Roman cavalry just before she reached the Euphrates River. Her empire, which had burned so brightly, collapsed. And this is where her story is erased. What happened to her? The Roman propaganda, written by Aurelian's historians, gives us the official ending. They say, she was paraded through the streets of Rome in Aurelian's triumph. A pathetic, broken figure, weighed down by so many golden chains that she could barely walk. A public spectacle to prove that this is what happens when a barbarian woman dares to challenge the power of Rome. It's a powerful story, but it might be a lie. Other sources say she starved herself to death, defiant to the end. Others say she was beheaded. Still others, more sympathetic, say Aurelian was so impressed by her that he pardoned her, gave her a villa in Tivoli, and she lived out her days as a Roman philosopher. We don't know her ending. And that's the point. The victors Aurelians. Historians chose the story that served them. The story of the chains. Zenobia was erased, not by having her name chiseled from stone, but by having her legacy rewritten. She was forgotten by being reduced to a simple morality tale, a footnote of failure. She's not remembered as the empress who built an empire, but as the warrior queen who lost it. Zenobia's ambition was inconvenient for a Roman emperor who could not stand the humiliation of being challenged by a woman. History is not merely a list of dates and events, but rather an active, engaging story told by individuals with clear agendas. Moreover, for centuries, we have only been provided with a biased and incomplete version of this story. The stories of these truly remarkable queens were certainly not lost to history. They were rather hidden from public view and carefully buried by men who were well aware that power, much like a ruthless hunter, is not solely about winning spectacular battles. Rather, power is an intricate game that encompasses a deeper understanding and control over the narrative that unfolds afterward. These buried stories provided opportunities for significant personal and political growth. In many cases, the women who emerged as powerful leaders eventually surpassed their male counterparts, demonstrating that true power is not determined by one's gender. As these remarkable queens continue to be rediscovered and celebrated, it will be crucial to preserve the lessons they left behind for future generations to learn and apply. The real question isn't just, why did we forget them? The actual question that needs addressing is, who else out there might still be available, lying in the dust, eagerly waiting to be